in a situation where you find that a person look at the
not necessarily tribal or regional.
But I have said that.
Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is Daybreak on Trust Television, reaching you from the nation's capital, Abuja. It's now time to take our dailies on Daybreak, and we have Dr. Suleiman A. Suleiman, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Daily Trust. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. We're happy to have you in the studio.
Good morning.
All right, now we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper, the paper of record. The first story there below the nameplate, you have PDP ask UNGA to demand commitment from Buhari on 2023 elections. Real reasons APC postponed state congresses. You also find the story saying police arrest 3 kidnappers of Bethel school students. The lead story there, as harvest sets in, middlemen mop up grains. The riders' prices keep rising as consumers raise alarm. International speculators flood Nigerian markets. Situation getting out of hand, that's according to experts. And there on the pictorial you see a maize farm there showing you the real picture of the harvest period here. And below that, VAT Rao, FG malls dragging Rivers, Lagos to Supreme Court. And at the very bottom, you have reps amend Power Sector Reform Act 15 years after. Zulum to FG, deploy technology to protect infrastructure in Borno. Court fixes judgment in ex-Kano Emir Sanusi's suit for November 30th. These are some of the major stories on the front cover of Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Let's begin with the lead story there. As harvest sets in, middlemen mop up grains. Yes, a lot of efforts towards diversifying the economy, particularly through the agricultural sector. But it appears that there are some challenges associated with that as well.
Well, the challenge is the one that has always been. Agriculture in Nigeria has not really changed in the last 200, 300 years or even forever. Mainly it's subsistence farming. You and I, we own a small plot of land, we farm on it, and then whatever we're able to gather, we take to the market and sell. With that kind of agriculture, you're not going to produce enough food to feed the country, you're not going to produce enough to export, and evidently you're not going to earn enough to even pay government. That's the real challenge, And even the idea that middlemen are mopping up grains is precisely also that. They are mopping up grains because there are only, a small quantity of it. If you have one farmer who produces maybe, say, 20 trucks of grains in a year or 100 trucks of grains in a year, and you have 1,000 such farmers, then you can see it will not be easy for any individual or even companies to just start thinking of mopping up what is available. And prices of food will remain more or less the same for years and years and years, which is very, very important because when it comes to food, people see it mainly as something that bothers the poor, but it isn't. Food is political strategy, actually, because if food is cheap and is available, what tends to happen is that, for those of us in political science, what tends to happen is that societies become more stable. A society where most people can go home, can go to bed with their bellies full, is always a stable society, And then the opposite is also true. A society where most people are hard hit by what to eat, they are worried about what am I going to eat this morning, what am I going to eat tomorrow, we're not even thinking about next week, just today and tomorrow, or what am I going to have for dinner and so on. A society like that will be politically unstable. Okay. So it's not just about the poor or just about food itself, it's about how to hold society together. It's an important issue.
Okay, so what do we say is the reason for the rising prices of grains?
Well, so many factors, but as this story maybe indicates, one factor is that you have a situation where businesses, bigger businesses come and mop up grains that are produced by small-scale farmers. What this means is that the small-scale farmers themselves don't have the possibility of storing what they have produced. They don't have the capacity to store what they have produced until such a time that maybe the prices will be, more beneficial to them. So this is one area. These people will hold this food and then maybe later on sell at a higher price. But the hoarding itself creates scarcity, and that scarcity then raises the price. That's one factor. Then there's also the factor of how much is produced. As I mentioned earlier, if you produce lower, generally in economics, the lower the demand, sorry, the higher the demand, the higher will be the price as well. But in this case, high demand is caused by short supply. You have more people to feed than food available to feed them, even in the market. So these are some of the factors that cause the rises in price. And for Nigeria, this is particularly significant. In the last 5 years or so, our inflation rate has been quite high, in double digits, 18%, 19%, coming down to now 17%. But within that overall inflation rate, there's what they call food inflation, which is about the prices of goods and of food items only, and how that relates to other prices. The prices of other goods and services generally. So this food inflation has remained consistently high in the country, even when the other overall inflation is falling. And for Nigeria, food inflation accounts for over 60% of overall inflation. So as long as food doesn't, or the prices of food does not come down, then chances are that the price of other goods and services are also going to remain high. It's quite a serious matter.
Okay. So, but has the COVID-19 pandemic, has it been a contributing factor to this?
Well, yes. COVID-19 pandemic did lock down, in a way, maybe the stopped farmers from going to farm, but that was in 2020. I would say maybe banditry, for example, the insecurity in the northern part of the country, which is the part that produces most of the food consumed in the country. So if farmers cannot go to farm or abandon their farms, then chances are that their productivity levels or the amount of food they produce is going to reduce. And this also is going to drive up prices because there will be short supply as well.
All right, now, is this a helpless situation, really? Experts are saying that this is getting out of hand. What's the way out here? Can we control this, really?
Well, some people would say government, marketing boards, for example, that if you assure farmers that whatever they produce, whenever they produce them, they will have someone to sell to at prices that are reasonable to them. And what marketing boards do is they buy from farmers and then sell to the government, and then government keeps. Anytime that supply is low and prices are going up, the government now flood the market with its own reserves, which then helps to reduce the prices. But for me, even that is a short-term solution. The real solution is what Nigeria has been shying away from, which is that to have mechanized agriculture. We need young people coming out from the universities and then giving them loans to not farm small plots of land, but to have a farm as large as the size of Abuja, for example. You understand, or even bigger, because that's what you have in all these countries where food is relatively cheap. And like I said earlier, to have food being cheap is a national security strategy. You understand? So you need farmers where one person can hire 2,000 people in his farm, 5,000 people in his farm. So the amount of food they produce would then be more than enough for, to that, maybe for example, in 3 months, you can produce food that Nigerians will eat in 1 year. Okay. So that means that in 1 year, you will have 3 times amount of food that we need. And that way, the price of food will always be lower. And that too will bring about more jobs, more opportunities for more people to work. That, for me, is the only solution. And we are running away from it, and one day we'll have to face it.
Okay. Now, according to reports, some agro dealers were able to utilize hoarding some of these commodities. Could we say this has also contributed, to the scarcity of this commodity?
Yes, that has contributed to it, but also it's because the government is asleep, mostly, because the agro dealers are none. They are going into market. The market is a market. It welcomes everyone. So the government too can go as a market, and help also do the same thing, mop up these grains and sell later. But even then, in my opinion, the real cost is the fall in supply. A country of 200 million people has to produce more food than it needs. You understand? And if that happens, there is no amount of agro dealers that can map up what is already available. They can mop up because what is available is already small relative to the need.
Well then, we'll move on to the next paper here, looking at the Punch newspaper. The first story there, 62% of enterprises use mobile banking, says the NBS. You would find that on page 25. And then below that, National Assembly's approval unnecessary for e-transmission of results. That's according to REG.
Yes.
You also find that reps raise panel to probe leakage of classified documents. You'd see why we continue to borrow, says FG. September bonds oversubscribed on page 21. The lead story on the Punch newspaper, pensioners' hardship worsens as states owe backlogs of gratitudes. The writer there says Kano, Ekiti, Enugu, Benue pensioners hard hit, states cite cash crunch. You'd see also pensioners threaten to sue Southwest governors over consequential adjustment. The pictorial is showing you some suspects that were arrested by the police. 25 bandits kidnapped Kaduna Baptist students, says suspects blame desperation. You would see also beside that Fani Kade, estranged wife, sues ex-husband. IG demands 800 million naira. Inflation regulatory costs push banks' operating expenses to 874 billion naira. You would see pandemonium as Lagos motorcyclist kill policeman, destroy patrol vehicle. These are some of the major stories there on the Punch newspaper. Specifically, we're looking at the issues of pensions again.
Okay.
It's now an issue. We've seen protest by the police, and we saw some persons yesterday in Ogun State as well staging a protest. What exactly is going on here?
It's interesting that you said again, because that's what it is. It's been an ongoing issue for decades in Nigeria, and it's really quite a shame because in the modern economy, things like money have also changed. They are more about government authority, government trust, or the trust between citizens and the government, or between institutions and the government, than just something that is difficult to find. What am I trying to say? If a government, say a state government, and the federal government, they can all enter into an arrangement in which the federal government can underwrite, can guarantee, even ahead, that pensioners, salaries, even for workers, not just pensioners, the salaries can be paid for everyone on the first of the month. Just to give an example, for both pensioners, for workers, for everyone that are associated with either state governments or federal government. And then you pay these salaries ahead. And then maybe towards the end of the year, you now come and start working through the reconciliations, who was taking more, who was, and things like that. What that means is that that's a solution, you know. Situations where pensioners will be dying on pension queues, or where people will even die without receiving their pensions after having worked for years. All of these things, they are sending the wrong message to society that work does not pay. That, you know, it pays more to want to make it by all means. You understand? You know, it gives society a siege mentality. You know, it gives everyone insecurity. So from a public choice perspective, everyone will want something that will give them security. You know, so if you have an opportunity to amass as much wealth as you can, then you want to do that, because you have seen someone who worked 35 years, who worked 45 years, is dying on a pension queue without their pensions being paid. So government has the authority to assure citizens, to build that trust, you know, by saying this is our country. The government owns the naira, for goodness sake. You understand? You know, so it can say that, okay, once somebody has been verified as to having worked for this number of years and is entitled to these pensions, the money does not need to be available to the state government before they are paid. The money can be guaranteed by the government for 1 calendar year and paid to these persons. And then at the end of the money, the entire resource belongs to the same government, and it's our country. So I don't see that, you know, because part of what is causing delays is the federal government will have to pay the state governments, and then the state governments will do some reconciliations and all of these things. But you can do that in 1 year ahead.
Do you think that this has to do with maybe lack of prioritizing, you know, pensioners, you know, in this sense? Because there was a time we also heard that the federal government wants to borrow from pension fund and all of that. So what does that say about the commitment of government to like really take this seriously?
Actually, it's a good thing for the government to borrow from pension funds, you know, because when people say foreign investors, they're actually talking about things like pension funds. The pension funds of countries like US, UK, that is the funds where individual citizens, ordinary workers like you and I, contribute their pensions, pay insurances, you know, life insurance, home insurance, car insurance. These are the excess monies that the MOP brought to Africa to look for how to multiply them. That's what foreign investment is. There's nothing magical about it. So if you have that in Nigeria, and especially for a country of 200 million people, that means you have foreign investors, in quotes now, right here at home. You understand? So if the government is borrowing from pension funds, that's a good thing. But it should not in any way, you know, affect payments to those who are due their pensions.
You recall that the uproar at the time was about whether or not government will pay back the money and whether this could land pensioners into the kind of things that we are seeing now, you know, which is what some people believe at the time.
Again, it's more a matter of trust than real economics, actually. Because, like I said, if the people are worried that government may not pay back, it's just the way you will be worried if you borrowed me money, I may not pay back because you borrowed me last year and you had a hard time getting it back. You understand? So it's more a matter of trust than government's ability to pay back money in its own currency. You understand? You know, but that shouldn't be there, because the whatever happens, the authority of the government itself, it's you can take that to the bank.
Okay. Now I've seen situations where, for instance, somebody dies, and when it's time for the families to get the pensions, the processes takes quite long. Some have to even pay their way to start the process. What are your thoughts revolving around?
Well, again, but maybe that's part, maybe corruption, you know, bureaucratic red tape. One thing you can do about that is to look for a way of digitizing them, you know, so that people can do their enrollments, biometric, all these things like we did NIN and all that, and then you track these payments over time. Once somebody is due their money, you pay them to their account straight. I am aware that some state governments, you understand, or some organizations or some pension funds administrators have been able to do this to ensure that this kind of situations are avoided. It's difficult, it's not new in the country, it's been happening again and again, but I think it's rather a question of capacity to solve problems rather than even the corruption itself. You understand? You know, because even if you have corruption and you have that capacity to, it's as a problem, you have the capacity to solve it, then you can generate ways in which this kind of issues, for example, if the people in the pensions office don't have too much papers to deal with, you know, they don't have to deal with the pensioners directly. And if 95% of pensioners can get their pay straight to their account, then it means only you are left to deal with only 5 or 10% of those who are not able to get theirs, which is understandable for a human system. You understand? You know? So it's about the capacity for society to solve its own problems, and we have to build that capacity.
Okay, I can remember you giggled the other time when you read out that story on page 11 of the Punch, saying National Assembly's approval unnecessary for e-transmission of results.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about that?
It's entirely the Constitution, and the INEC itself has already raised this. The thing is quite unfortunate that the governing party, the APC, you know, particularly at the National Assembly, they are trying to change the electoral law. That itself is something funny. Why is it that every time we are having an election, we have to have a new electoral law? Countries have one electoral law and go with that for decades, you know, and use that same law to conduct, you know, tens of elections.
Isn't this because Nigeria is an emerging democracy, and so quite a lot of challenges are experienced every time we go to the polls, and so the need for us to go back to the legislative structure?
But that's the point of law. Law does not need to cover everything ahead. It only needs, you know, basic principles of things. You understand? And then institutions and individuals who are in charge can then work within those limits provided by the law to then implement certain provisions of the law that will more than enough cover for those challenges that you are talking about, but while still remaining within the limits of the law. For example, the new this recent electoral law, it hasn't come up with any new changes. If the Constitution of Nigeria gives the power to INEC to conduct elections in ways and manners that are free and fair, and INEC deems it fit that electronic transmission of election results is one of those ways and means, then all that INEC needs to do is to demonstrate it, to legitimate that point. But they don't need a new law for or against for that. That has already been assured in the Constitution. So that's why I feel it's not about the challenges, but the interest of the politicians. You understand? You know, the interest that people have that they cannot win elections unless they find ways around the laws and so on and so forth, which itself is cowardly in my view, because democracy gives you to mobilize resources, including communicative resources, to campaign for your views against those of anyone else, you know, to win elections. And the voters are there, they are not stupid. They will listen and vote for those whom they think will have their interest at best. So again, it is the failure of the politicians for not devising ideas, for not devising policies that can be game-changing in the electoral market. You understand? You know? So they are looking for ways to around these things. I don't think it's going to work.
Do you see this working in Nigeria?
Thank you. Certainly. I just feel that this idea that INEC cannot transmit, it will boil down to the individual and institutional strength of the INEC itself. Because the law that grants INEC the power to conduct free and fair elections, even if those mean using electronic transmission or anything, you know, and the idea of electronic transmission itself is just legalese, because INEC does the biometric data for voters, data registration is electronic. So if you are saying it cannot transmit results by electronic because it is electronic, then surely the registration of voters will also be null and void. So it's just semantics that they are playing. If INEC and the INEC leadership truly want to do this, I doubt if there is anyone or anything that can stop.
Now let's take a look at the Nation newspaper, where it reads at the top, police parade suspected abductors of Baptiste school pupils. We also have on the right, Pantami 5G network for deployment in January. And right below that, we have CMPP dismisses PDP's call for Emefiele's exit. And the big headline there says, blocking of terrorism funding yielding results, says federal government. And the writer speaks, Malemi, fresh charges likely against Yoruba Nation agitator Igboho. Then below that, army to put officer who maltreated youth corps member on trial. I think we're going to be taking a look at that on What's Trending later. So let's talk about the headline there saying blocking of terrorism funding yielding results, says federal government. Are you attesting to that?
Well, no, because certainly not.
He immediately said no.
No.
That's an affirmative no.
Yes, absolutely no. Because we've always been following this issue for a while now, isn't it? The government has not produced significant or sufficient evidence to demonstrate that it's clamping down on those who are funding terrorism. We would love to see that the government does this, but they are not doing that, because even the recent revelations actually didn't come from Nigeria, but largely from another government, the government of the United Arab Emirates, So there is, up till this moment, there is no indication yet that the government is really serious about clamping down on this. But even those who the government claim to have been arrested, if you follow the news, their lawyers are complaining that these people have been detained without them being charged to court, even after the 90 days that the law allows. You understand, for government to detain suspects of terrorism, before charging them. That window has passed, and yet there have been no charges filed against them in court. So there is it's just public relations, to try to build, mobilize Nigerians to have that good feel good factor, that they are really clamping down on those who are sponsoring terrorism. But the evidence on ground is not sound.
Do you think that Nigeria is on top of its game when it comes to issues of intelligence gathering, in terms of data, in terms of investigation and all of that?
In fact,
would you say that we are?
That's the most important missing link in the entire issue of insecurity in Nigeria. Let me give you an example. In the 60s and 70s and 80s, when ideas were quite strong, young people everywhere across Europe, particularly in Britain, just to give you an example, people were forming Marxist organizations, anarchist organizations here and there. What the police did is they infiltrated these organizations, by sending in people who are actually police officers, but who became bona fide members of this organization. Some of them even got married to male or female leaders of these organizations and even had children with them, all the time being police officers, on intelligence duties and reporting to the police. So the question is, when Boko Haram was starting, for example, in 2003, 2004, all the way to 2009, when they turned violence, where were the intelligence services in the country? How many intelligent officers did they have as part of Boko Haram to tell us about the leaders, who is likely to succeed, who is likely to be this? If this leader dies, who is likely to succeed? Where were they? They have never at any point been on top of their game as far as intelligence is concerned. And that has really been the missing link in the entire. The same with banditry. The bandits are in their hundreds and thousands. What that means is that it's easy to infiltrate their camps. Because they have hundreds of people. One bandit, as our newspaper has reported, one bandit leader has up to 400 people that he controls. meaning that he cannot know all of them, meaning that that's an opportunity for intelligence services to infiltrate them with their own people, or to even find a way to bring some of the people who are already members into the side of the police, as informants. It will be risky, but it's with training, and determination is something that can be done. They have not been doing this, and so all the time, the bandits and the terrorists are always ahead of the government because there is no intelligence.
So are you saying Nigeria is not applying the right approach?
Well, that's a different thing altogether. Certainly the right approach must and should have, and even now it should, involve intelligence gathering of the most sophisticated kind, you understand, including, where possible, infiltrating the ranks of these people. Because people have done it for organizations like Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and so on. So it can be done here as well. So that's part of the right strategy. But the right strategy goes beyond that, In this country, the way the issue of terrorism, particular, not banditry, terrorism in particular, and they're becoming one and the same now, the way the issue has been framed has made it difficult for government to explore other opportunities that it can use to bring things to an end. For example, in recent weeks, we have had a situation where the two major leaders of the terrorist organizations have been killed. You understand? Hundreds of Boko Haram members have surrendered, and have tendered themselves to military authorities, And at the same time, there is infighting between them. This gives, in my opinion, this gives the government opportunity to explore other means, even if it means, okay, anyone who is in Boko Haram, if you come back to this side, you understand, and lay down your arms, and you will not fight anybody again and not kill anybody again, we can forgive. You understand? Because that's what surrender means. That I want to be forgiven. You understand? But we say, okay, not just forgive. You will have to serve your term, in jail if you are deemed guilty. That is, you be prosecuted and so on, but not killed. And so that's an option. We have not explored that option, and I think we should, if only to bring this to an end. It's been going on for 12 years. A country cannot continue to fight itself for this long and expect to make progress.
Now, another story of interest that I see there on the Nation newspaper is the first story at the top. It says police parade suspected abductors of Baptist schools pupils. And you also have the writer saying 21 school children still in captivity. Now, the suspected abductors have been caught, and we still have some of the students still in captivity.
That's quite ironical, isn't it? And we wait to see what the police will say. But hopefully, if you have the suspected abductors, but what happened, when I read the story this morning, was that there were 25 bandits who went to carry out the operation, as one of them said himself, So it is possible that they divided the victims, you understand, the abductees, among themselves, So it is possible that some will still remain in captivity because those they are with are not yet known. So that means that the police would need to do more investigation to get to these people.
Well, it appears like it's a hooroo as far as this is concerned, because by the time you have some of the abductors in your custody, then they should be able to provide information that would lead to the rescue of these children.
Yes, but if the gangs are aware that some of their members have been arrested and with the police, then maybe their own movements and strategies will also change. You understand? I agree that they should be able to provide police with information to lead to but I also think that it may not be as easy. Remember, large parts of Nigeria are entirely ungoverned. You understand? There is no government presence in large, so they can move from one part to another. They can move from one state to another, from one forest to another. So it's really a bit difficult.
All right, then. Let's take a look at the next paper now. We'll be looking at The Guardian. And on The Guardian there, the first story there says Africa needs 150 million COVID-19 jabs monthly to vaccinate 70% population by 2022. You also have PDP, CNPP disagree on MFLA as Dodehe denies indicting CBN governor. You'd see also leadership remains critical challenge in polity, says Utomi. Policeman fear death, many injured as police Okada riders clash in Ajao Estate. You would find the lead story saying VAT controversy. FG heads to Supreme Court. Reps consider bill to back states. Now, all the other riders to that story says FG collection of VAT by FIRS remains, and the Lagos VAT collection will not impoverish other states. Reps, we are ready to revisit 5% oil firm profit share to host communities. Here we are again. Oil-producing communities badly hurt by PIA, says Akwa Ibom governor. You'd see that below and beside the pictures there, Yoruba Nation agitators, others stage mega protest as Buhari addresses UNGA today. You'd see the riders there. PDP reports Buhari to UN over terrorism, rights violations, others. Reno Mokri joins NNAS for grand 1 million man rally. Akintoye alleges government paying back foreigners $500 each to protest against Yoruba Nation. These are some of the stories there on the Guardian there. The issue about VAT has lingered for quite a while now, beyond what anyone could think. We are seeing that the federal government is going to the Supreme Court. The reps consider bill to back states. So it means that the legislature,
Yes.
it's on the side of the people this time. Is that so?
Well, not necessarily yet. It's just rhetoric. I wish they were on the side of the people. I wish that they would always be on the side of the people, not only on the issue of VAT, but on all other issues. But the legislature is part of the government. It's not like the media outside of the government and then helping to keep the government accountable. They are government. So I think we need to take that in. And there is a direct thread, between Aso Rock and the National Assembly complex, especially the party in control in Aso Rock is also the same party that is in control in the National Assembly. So at some point, regardless what the reps want, and there's no, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily anti-government on this or on the side of the people. We will wait to see that.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Now, where do we draw the lines here? Because this is quite dicey. We've had, Malam Hamza Idris here at one time and said, look, this could lead to some kind of policy somersault. As much as you want this VAT to be taken by states, you are also careful not to create a situation where companies and business owners will be double charged,
of course,
by states and then at the federal level, and then when they go to other states and all of that. It's quite a very dicey situation. Where do we draw the lines?
Well, I think I don't even like the idea that it's a dicey situation or it's controversy and so on. It's normal thing that happens in democracies, in federal systems. There will always be agreements of this kind. But I agree with you that it's not possible, or it's practically impossible and difficult, to have a different VAT rate in River State and another one in Kaduna. So a business that have a branch in Port Harcourt and another one in Kaduna may be paying different rates of VAT. You understand? I don't think that would be fair to businesses. And indeed, the current VAT controversy, as I wrote in my column last week, it's not really about constitution per se. It's an arrangement, convenient arrangement between states and the federal government. Okay, since each state cannot, have its own VAT regime, and therefore different VAT regimes across the same country, let us pool resources together so that one person, one agent, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, will be collecting on behalf of everyone else, and then at the end of the day, we share it. So the real question is in the sharing formula. Right now, that sharing formula gives only 20%, only 20% goes to derivation. How much VAT is derived from my state or from yours? Only 20% of that. 50% is for equality of states, 30% for population, to states and local government. So it is there that the real politics of this issue is. And once you can change that, say, okay, for example, some people have suggested that if, instead of saying 20% derivation, let's have 50% derivation, meaning that Lagos State and Rivers State, and a few, and FCT here, and Delta and Edo and Ogun, and these are the only states, and maybe Kaduna now coming up, these are the only states that actually have anything significant to share from VAT. The rest of the states are more or less like everyone else. Yes.
Okay, as you've mentioned, this happens in every democratic system.
Yes.
Should we say this whole VAT debate should have happened a long time ago?
Absolutely. And if it has happened much earlier and been settled, our democracy, our federalism will have been stronger for it. But nevertheless, we have had years of interruptions of democracy by military governments and so on and so forth. So it's a good thing that we are still dealing with these issues now. Once the Supreme Court makes a pronouncement on it, my understanding or my current guess is that either side will not be happy with whatever or will not be 100% happy with whatever the Supreme Court says. So further negotiations will still continue. Yeah.
Would you say that these, challenges the kind of federalism that Nigeria practices at the moment? A lot of people have raised questions about, Nigeria not practicing true federalism and all of that. So is this one of the symptoms of not
when people say that, my own judgment, when people say that, I always feel that they have no idea what they are talking about. It's very simple to say true federalism, but show me one true federalism. In the United States, there is a lot of emphasis on states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. Do you know why? Because of racism. Because deep into U.S. society is the question of the place of blacks. Blacks and their position in society is organically and economically associated to the fate of some states, but not others. So those states where blacks matter, particularly at the time that the U.S., in the 1800s and 1900s, you understand, where they had slavery and so on. Slavery was significant for plantation economy, for their agric economy, and so on. So this is why states' rights was quite a strong thing in the U.S. We don't have the same configuration there. So things will be different. And even now, even as I speak, states like Vermont, Louisiana, there are many poor states in the US.
But the conversation the conversation is like resources are, given to places where less resources, let me put it this way, less resources is given to places that need it most. So for instance, if you look at the FAC, for instance, the formula of sharing the allocation, a certain percentage goes to the federal government, states gets, and then local government at that level. And then you find that we talked about ungoverned spaces at the local level. And part of the reasons is the lack of resources at that level to really govern the place and all of that. So don't you think that there's need for a reversal of some sort?
There's need for amendments and modifications. You understand? If you call it reversal, fine, I'm in agreement. But that does not mean that you don't have true federalism. Even if you do that, it will still not give you true federalism because there will still be other questions where similar things are still happening. You understand? The reason why you are saying this is because we are looking at the issues from states or regions, north versus south, or rivers versus Kaduna. If we begin to consider citizen as the unit of understanding how resources distributed. You understand? Between those who have jobs, for example, and those who don't have any jobs. Are you following? Or between those who are poor and those who are better off, for example. And these are also other ways of looking at the same issues. You are following, Then the whole picture will change. So you can have a situation where you give even 70% to states, you understand, and 30% to the federal government. And that would still not give you true federalism, because the individual Nigerian, their conditions may not change. And that argument is the elephant in the room, in fact, that even what we are receiving now, what states are receiving now, exactly what do they do with it? We will still come to that argument.
That's well, is that not a problem of corruption and, lack of accountability and transparency in governance?
Well, number one, probably, but I don't think so, because we blame corruption because it's easy to have something to blame. You understand? It's not always that corruption. Because, for example, if you have, if you don't have corruption, you understand? And you receive 100 naira, it does not follow that you will do with your 100 naira as she will do with hers. You understand? It's still possible that you will blow the 100 naira, not because you stole it or anything, but blow it on things that are unnecessary, whereas she uses hers to. So there is also how to manage society's resources, separate even from corruption itself. You understand? The things we spend money on. Sometimes we spend money. For example, look at a state like Benue State, thinking of building a airport. Benue is a state where the bulk of the fund, locally generated, comes from farming. You understand? So what are you going to do with the airport? Are you going to take yams to the airport to move from there to Lagos or what? That state will be better to think of getting a rail line rather than an airport. That's not a question of corruption. It's possible that if you vote 200 billion for the airport, all 200 billion will actually go into the airport and not to nobody's pocket. But it doesn't make that decision sound still.
Yeah, but anyways.
I think you were going to...
because of our time, let's just
stop here.
Let's just leave it there, because it's a whole discussion there.
Right.
Thank you so much.
We have been discussing today's dailies with Dr. Suleiman, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Daily Trust. Thank you so much for coming on the show.